In this episode, I am once again joined by Alex W., long-term practitioner of Zen, Pragmatic Dharma, and Western Occultism. Alex takes a deep dive into the world of magic to compare esoteric systems from around the world, including Western Occultism, Tibetan Buddhism, Indian Tantric and Goddess systems, Santeria, and more. Alex gives a history of the development of Western Occultism, exploring the Egyptian mysteries, Neoplatonism, Catholic mysticism, Kabbalah, Shi'ism, Wicca, the Golden Dawn, Thelema, chaos magic, and beyond. Alex discusses esoteric techniques such as spellcraft, opening the psychic senses, working with entities, mantra, yantra, alchemy, astrology, and divination. He considers the tension between natural talent and practiced skill, reviews strategies for protection against curses and entity oppression, and recounts his own path as a practitioner of the occult. So without further ado, Alex W. Alex W., welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, thank you, Steve, for inviting me again.
Well, I'm so pleased to be talking with you again, and gosh, over the last weeks and months we've recorded and released a trilogy of episodes all about your personal spiritual path. Awakening, you could say, enlightenment, that sort of thing. And we began with a very personal journey, your own journey, in fact, through that territory. And as we unfolded through that trilogy, we finished it with a kind of guide to awakening. I presented you with a hypothetical tabula rasa student, and you gave your ideal curriculum, what you would give to that person to reach awakening and indeed to address the territory beyond. And those were fascinating episodes, that first trilogy, and very well received, in fact. And so I'm so delighted to be starting what might be another short series with you. But this time on a slightly different topic. Not the topic exactly of awakening and the post-awakening territory, but instead the topic of magic.
Oh.
Magic with a CK, and if you really want to be fancy, a CKE. Magick.
Yeah, well, you know why. The old Renaissance English spelling. So, yeah, magic. So maybe before getting too much into the details of my own journey through it, and that's a side of my life that's very private normally, let me just maybe explain what we mean by magic nowadays. And it's true that Aleister Crowley is the one that made this term into something specific for people to understand clearly what we're talking about. So, within the Anglo-Saxon world, I would say that modern magic, the way most people understand it nowadays, is related to the Golden Dawn. So we are at the end of the 19th century, and some high-ranking Freemasons, based on some documents, we don't know exactly if they were passed by a secret German fraternity or something. But anyway, they've been able to syncretize more or less all knowledge available at the time on the topic of Kabbalah, astrology, geomancy, theurgy, and all this into a kind of Rosicrucian system, which is basically Christian, based on Hermetic Kabbalah, which is not directly magic in the sense of like witchcraft, of sorcery, the way we could understand it, which was more a form of theurgy based on ritual magic, okay? So we are not into casting spells and this kind of thing. The Golden Dawn was basically there was a kind of intellectual schooling, which was the first part, where people were given knowledge lectures that gave them the literacy of the knowledge of the basic symbols, like those of astrology, the very basics of alchemy, geomancy, tarot, and all this. And gradually they would do some kind of visualization or meditation practices, rituals. We are more into the kind of ceremonial magic. Therefore, this implies rituals where people like I standing and move around with different symbolic gestures, calling different angelic or divine names, opening and closing, the energies of different elements or planets. And the purpose, gradually, as people advance, so there was some kind of Masonic initiatory rituals for each grade, and then people will follow the Kabbalistic ascension of the stars from Earth to Moon, Mercury, and all that, to reach the final stage, which would be some kind of enlightenment. So that's basically how the system works, and people then combine also like astral travel, which they used to call it like scrying in the spirit vision, if I'm not mistaken, and they would like journey through the stars and gradually merge with the first principle. It was heavily based on the idea that Christianity is a kind of reinterpretation of the Egyptian mysteries of Osiris, namely a solar cult based on the idea of death and rebirth. All right. This explains why Aleister Crowley was so interested into Egyptian gods and all this later. But the Golden Dawn was highly syncretic and therefore included, but this is not something only modern. Actually, you can see that between the 3rd and 5th century of our common era, like Alexandria was in Rome, and all these places were a bit like New York, of what London used to be in the beginning of 20th century, a place of mixed cultures and influences, where people would take different elements and try to synthesize them into something that made sense. Okay, so that's basically what Aleister Crowley calls magic. And what he did is to take the structure of the Golden Dawn and then combine it with what he called mysticism, which was a mix of Raj Yoga, so mostly like the asana was not like the nowadays stretching and gymnastic, was basically to be able to sit in the lotus or half lotus or some posture for a long time, and then some heavy like pranayama, observing thought, concentration, and all that. And he was introduced to that, I think, especially by his mentor in the Golden Dawn, Alan Bennett, who later became because he was suffering. He had some kind of asthma, like Crowley, by the way, and he moved to Ceylon, and before that to India and all this, Sri Lanka more than India, and maybe Burma, if I remember well, anyway, and then Ceylon. And he was the founder of the first organization that translated Pali texts in England. So it's one of the pioneers, actually, of Western Buddhism in England, which is interesting. So all that to say more or less like what we mean by magic. And then the way the Golden Dawn evolved. So you see like Aleister Crowley has his own take on it, which his idea of Thelema, which is in a way a religion or a philosophy based on finding one's true will. His idea is not like do what you want and don't care about people. No, the idea is that like in the sky, like each star has its own, or each planet has its own orbit and movements, and therefore for the harmony of the whole, each person's task is to find his true will, or like soul purpose, and to commit to that as his own personal law. And for him, the purpose of magic was to find the true will and then to completely embody it. Okay, so that's like Aleister Crowley's Thelema. From that, we have all this is related to England, basically. I mean, there was a moment at the turn of the 19th, 20th century where Paris was also a big place with Eliphas Levi and then René Guénon, Papus, all these people. But then England took a very big part in doing this actually like practical and doable. I think the French are more theoretical. Therefore, there are many texts that have not been translated into English, I believe, but they give you a very clear intellectual understanding of symbolism and how this whole thing works. But the British are more pragmatic, empirical, and practical, and made it available and doable. And the way the place that the US plays into that is that they make these sort of very niche domains. They sort of broadcast it and make them popular through pop culture and monetize, you know. So it's the US that sort of amplifies and turns that into a cultural phenomenon, basically. So back in England, after the sort of Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley's Thelemic magical system, we had the movement of witchcraft with Gardner that took up most probably some elements of the Golden Dawn, mixing it with his own understanding of tantric systems from his stay, I think, in Malaysia or some South Asian country. And so he claimed to have come into contact with traditional British witches that initiated him and all this. I don't really believe that. It seems to have been people more connected to the Theosophical Society, and he sort of created his own system based on some lores and some the Leland and stories about from anthropologists and novelists about the survival of witchcraft in Europe from an old religion that took the guise of witchcraft during the persecution of Christianity and all this. Anyway, created a system that that became very popular later, actually, because this was like confined to some covens where people were initiated. It was very secretive, and gradually this became mainstream. Now, another current movement that is more related to people like myself, and especially like the first stage of Alan Chapman and Duncan Barford's involvement with magic, is chaos magic. So the name can be misleading, but it actually started by people very much involved with like Aleister Crowley and Druidism and kind of witchcraft that were sort of wanted to strip magic from the whole symbolic sort of Kabbalistic or Christian, Rosicrucian symbolic system and create, get back to the core and focus on the results, like getting results through the understanding of the core principles. So I mean, it's at least my take on chaos magic. So the idea, they took inspiration from a student of Aleister Crowley, Osman Spare, that was a painter and used what he called like sigils, which are like, what he did is to, like, you take a short sentence, it is my will to this and that, and they would extract the main letters and turn this into a glyph that can be made very artistic in a way, and that symbolizes the intention. And the idea is to bypass the conscious mind by focusing on this glyph in order to trigger some kind of change in the probability of events in accordance to this intention, but bypassing the conscious mind. So we get to the very core of spell casting, or even the symbols, the sigils used to invoke or evoke a spirit, encoding a desire, a wish, or intention within a glyph. So that was something very much at the core of the way chaos magic started. Another principle of chaos magic was that the most important part was to get into an altered state of consciousness. And therefore, they put a very big emphasis on meditation, concentration, as well as using like fasting or breath work, or even like psychedelic drugs to get into altered states of consciousness or trance or these kind of things. The other principle of chaos magic is and that's quite unique, I think, is seeing belief as a tool. What does it mean? Is that somebody who has a extremely materialistic, rationalist way of seeing the world is less likely to experience something magical, because his or her belief would filter the experience, rationalize it, and make it in a way impossible to be experienced. And in the same way, if somebody adopts a different belief system, at least as a thought experiment, like an anthropologist that would immerse himself or herself into some like shamanic culture or something, adopting temporarily their belief system, is more likely to experience the kind of thing that these people do experience during their ceremonies and practices. So that was like the basic idea, but we can also see it in a way of this whole kind of manifestation phenomena that we see now, the idea that kind of mindset and belief system actually does have some influence on our perception and therefore of our experience in a way, although it goes too far, I think, in this with this kind of new agey manifestation system or current that we see now, that goes back to the new thought in the 1920s in the US. So that's basically the sort of introduction to explain what I mean by magic. So the thing also about chaos magic, through this belief as a tool, is that one could easily like immerse himself into a different system to understand it and extract the core principles. So these are the things within chaos magic, if you will, that attracted me, because I think it very much matches my own sort of personality, and the way I see things is that it's difficult for me to commit or integrate within a worldview or an organization or system. But what I naturally do is to sort of extract core principles, to understand the architecture and the way things work, for the purpose of exploring consciousness and different altered states and sort of alternate realities. So yeah. So I think, like most people, magic is a bit complicated, because it's not like somebody wants to go into like Zen Buddhism, which is another thing in which I got involved, where the practice is like simple. It's always more or less the same thing. You can meet groups that teach you how to do it, and then you have like beginner's book in the beginning, and gradually you get into some more sophisticated or subtle theory about it, and eventually you experience stuff. Magic, there is no sort of universal guidebook or something that will teach you everything. So it's made for people that are very sort of self-driven, independent thinking, and able to find what they need at the right place. But what I noticed from all people, and this has been my experience also, is that first of all, the theory plays a big part. We need to understand how things work. That's the part that Kabbalah played in the Golden Dawn. For me personally, it's more like Neoplatonism. I think is more in line because of my like philosophical background. It goes back to Plato, and before this Pythagoras and all this. So it's really rooted in the sort of the birth and the core principles of Western culture, I would say. Like Plato really, if you read the dialogues of Plato, it's really gives you the explanation and the methodology of what philosophy is all about, and that's also the core of science, the scientific methods, the use of number, epistemology, physics, ethics, politics. So it's really like at the core of our civilization. And the way Platonism evolved, which what we then called Neoplatonism, but it's basically the same thing, included actually like all sciences, because they took parts from Aristotle, from the Stoics, and in philosophy also, it's not like a religious faith, which are clear dogmas, and therefore there's always a dialogue with third parties. And therefore, a Neoplatonist in 21st century should be able to respond and dialogue with, I don't know, like with Nick Land or with Slavoj Žižek, or, like contemporary philosophers. That's, I think, also the very interesting part is that it's always sort of modern and updated in a way, because it's the philosophy, unlike science that evolves through discoveries and changes its paradigm through sort of scientific revolutions. Philosophy, we can't say that Heidegger is higher than Plato as a philosopher. It's like time doesn't have much influence on that. So Neoplatonism also is the root actually of the Kabbalah, in my opinion. Maybe like Jewish rabbis would have another view on this, but it's basically this kind of Alexandrian Platonic culture that infused different religions. So the Jews took the ideas of the 10 numbers of Pythagoras, with one as the core principle, Kether, and then going down through also the planets and everything, and seeing the sort of the universe as a layered structure, with on top the one, or the Ain, Ein Sof, Ein Ur, the sort of ultimate principle beyond being and non-being, a bit like the Tao which is completely separate from the rest of the universe, but at the same time infuses everything, like number one. Every number you can divide it by itself, it makes one. So it's completely transcendent, and in a way also completely immanent. And from there, you have the nous, or the intellect, which is the world of forms for Plato, and gods, deities, but not seen in the way we understand them now, seen more as the core principles ordering reality on every level. But within us, that's awareness, consciousness, and the rational thinking. That's the nous, the intellect. Intellectus in Latin is that which knows, that which is aware, that can know and understand. And from there, and the intellect thinking itself is more or less the kind of non-dual state where the knower and the object of knowledge become one. So that's how it translates into different traditions. And then from there, we have like Tohen, the one, or Toagathon, the good, the ultimate good, Nous, the intellect, and then Psyche, which is more like Jung's collective unconscious. That's our psyche. So that's the world of dreams, the world of visions, psychic perception, and the world through which these core intellectual principles manifest themselves. So let's say the principle of harmony, beauty as a pure idea, like the kind of function of a computer program, will use the kind of graphic user interface in order to communicate on a lower layer its expression. So this principle of harmony, beauty, and relationship, harmonious relationship, will translate, let's say, into Aphrodite or Venus as a kind of symbolized archetype. The way the poets like Hesiod and Homer would describe them in poetry, so in novels, in stories, that through myth would, because the myth for the Greeks were allegories, they were not taken literally like fundamentalist Christians read the Bible. So moderns see like Greek mythology or the ideas of gods in a very sometimes limited way, because they don't understand like the way the Neoplatonists explain like the mysteries of Dionysusm is more like the Hindus. You know, they have this myth from the Puranas where Shiva cuts the head of his son Ganesh, and then it's you've got this elephant head to replace the chopped head, but these are symbols and allegories to explain some metaphysical principles. So that's the way they used to see things. And from the psyche, which is also includes our subconscious, so there's like highest and lower part of the psyche. It's also all our desires, drives. I mean, that's the word of like psychoanalysis and all this. And then physis, the physical world. That translates those symbols into nature, and therefore like the planets, we talked about Venus later, the planet Venus would be the physical manifestation of the Venus, of the way the goddess Venus may appear to a magician in a vision, which itself on a higher layer is connected to the archetypal idea of Venus as this principle of beauty and harmony in the divine mind, or the nous, the divine intellect. Okay, so that's the way Neoplatonists saw things, and basically this understanding of this layered reality was translated into the Kabbalah in the Jewish esoteric world. When the academy was closed by the Christian emperor in 526 something, some of these philosophers were invited by the ruler of Persia, and therefore we find this Neoplatonist system in the like Ismaili faith, and many Sufi, either Shia Islam, all the authors like Henri Corbin talked about. or into Sufi Sunni orders that are very Neoplatonic in essence. And within the Western world, it's basically, you have like the church fathers who were heavily like the pseudo Dionysus, the Greek, mostly church fathers, as well as Saint Augustine, that played a big role in the Western church, which is not like the Catholic Church, as well as the Protestant, because Martin Luther is very much inspired by Saint Augustine. So we have this Neoplatonist world, and Ireland, I would say, because the Irish were more interested into Greek and could read Greek often more than the Latins of like France or mainland England. There's that part, and then the other part. I just give this brief introduction. I don't get into too much details now, but just to understand what I'm talking about. And then during the Renaissance, what happened is that there was the Council of Florence that was for the purpose of reuniting the Eastern Greek Church with the Roman Catholic Church. And during this event, many theologians and scholars from Greece or nowadays Turkey, from the Byzantine world, traveled to Ferrare and then to Florence. And one of them was Plethon, or his kind of Greek Neoplatonist name was, he chose Plethon. And he had actually recreated the religious system of ancient Greek within a Neoplatonic structure and all this. And that was of great interest for the scholars of the Renaissance. And later, Cosimo di Medici in Florence, 20 years later, created a Platonic academy, where we'll see like Marcello Ficino, all these people that recreated a kind of Neoplatonic theology based more on a Christian worldview. And then later, when the Turks took over the whole of Turkey and Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, a lot of books from Byzantine monasteries were taken to Venice and to Italy and were translated into Latin and gradually into vernacular languages, which actually triggered the Renaissance. So all this to say also that magic actually is not some kind of old superstition that has been replaced by rational science. Magic is actually at the core of philosophy, of the Renaissance, of science. Theurgy, another name for it is hieratike techne. Techne, which we know now in technology, tech, we think like Silicon Valley, but techne in Greek is a craft, is an art. It's a mix of both. So like witchcraft is techne. You know, when we speak about the spiritual technique, it's also techne. So the meaning was different, but that's the birth of science. So we can see that these were not separated. They were just like basically the same thing. And this goes up to until Descartes, to like John Dee and these scholars that were even like Newton. Talk about Newtonian science, which is the most materialistic down to, but Newton, if you read his biography, was above all an alchemist. His passion was alchemy. He was not. So that's very interesting. So anyway, so getting back to my own interest. So I started, for me, like chaos magic was what met more my own like style and personality. And since it placed a heavy importance on meditation and stuff, that was a way for me to really like, because that's what I like most, like meditation and deep concentration, this kind of thing. And then it was a way for me to use my understanding of different philosophical religious systems, to unify them and to gradually get to the core of it. So I started with that. And then in parallel to my sort of more like Zen Buddhist practice, right? So I sort of gradually went through the basics of like spellcraft, divination, like a bit of astrology, tarot card divination, or a bit of I Ching. Then some kind of Golden Dawn type ceremonial magic rituals, a bit of like more like astral work, not necessarily the kind of out of body experience where people like are in deep sleep and suddenly move out of the body, more the kind of visionary experiences, you know. So that was the kind of basic, but without a structure. I never been part of any organization and stuff. It was just like self-taught. And this, at some point, like I described, so I won't tell the whole story again, but that's when I met on the forum Alan Chapman, and we were just talking about Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. But when I suddenly heard that he was a member of the well-known Chaos Magic organization in New York, in London, I was just like, oh, this is so cool, this is so great, because that's what I was actually also doing. And therefore, when I started working with him, I wanted to follow actually his path, because like he was teaching me his way to awakening or enlightenment or whatever you call it. But that involved a lot of magic too. I mean, it was a mix of pure meditation, but also of magic the way I sort of described it. And therefore, when I started working with him, I sort of used his books, and some we don't talk about, but there's a small booklet called The Camel Rides Again, and which is actually, I just love it because it's so short and simple. It gives you the basic principle of what is magic and why it works and how to make it work. And then it gives you some very simple. Alan has the talent of being super syncretic and say a lot in just a few words. So on each page or one or two pages, you have like one core thing that you need to master, you know, like the way to meditate, the way for concentration, practice, then about the Kabbalah, then about astral travel. So you just go divination. So you go through these. For me, it was the best way to sort of recap everything and make it into some very clear type of practices. So I did that based also on all the material that Alan Duncan on the Baptist Head website had published, which included back then a kind of tool for the British Kabbalah, which was a way to put English words and then get their number through the calculation of the value of each letter of the alphabet in the system. So I used that, and then they started to publish the Baptist Head trilogy, which is now available in one volume. So I use also their material to see how it matched my own development. Okay, so so Alan very quickly actually saw that I could start like Enochian scrying. So it would be too long to explain what it is, but I did a bit in the first episode of the first series, that was a way for him to see at which stage I was, because the symbols tend to unfold and reflect where you are in the process, okay, of spiritual development. And then, and Duncan recently on your channel talked a lot about it. Alan asked me to start invoking my holy guardian angel, okay? So I described the other time how it felt, and that's often there's a kind of emotional, part of it. Now, the thing about magic also is and I think that's something I learned from Aleister Crowley, is to see it as a kind of more like a science of the mind, the way like Tibetans would present Tantric Buddhism to the West, or more what Aleister Crowley called scientific illuminism, which is using the means of science for the aim of religion. So one is like the raw experience that is seen as data. So when you experience something, you just go through it without rationalizing or trying to understand things. And then you take notes, and then you analyze and try to make sense to it, separating the two tasks. And that's very important. So now maybe I get more into my understanding of this holy guardian angel thing. So Aleister Crowley considered that the holy guardian angel would reveal someone's true will, but I think that was like his experience, where the two things sort of merge at the same time. It wasn't the case for me. Since we talked about Neoplatonists, the way they saw this is that we talked about the gods, like the noetic gods, and then the way they manifest in the psychic world. And in the same way, they had a whole hierarchy of like daimonos, which in the Christian world would be a mix of archangels, angels, genies, and then demons, the way Christians understand them, but the Greek had a different understanding. So daimonos for the Greeks is like intermediaries between the gods and the humans. So there's a whole range of spirits. Sometimes they even include the heroes, the divinized heroes, into that we hear about in Greek mythology, and some philosophers got this status. And then we have like intermediaries. So they are like guardian daimons. They are like some of them have a role to like challenge and confront us to our subconscious material. And then some had the role of being like more like a guardian angel in the Christian sense of the term, had some kind of function to coordinate things between different realms. And some of them, these good daimonos had the purpose of helping the ascent of the soul to the ultimate divine principle. Okay, so and that played a big part in Neoplatonic theurgy. So I see the Abramelin ritual as a kind of Jewish translation of this principle, because as I said, this Neoplatonic theurgy had a very short span within the Roman Empire because of its embrace of Christianity, but it took its way through the esoteric teachings of different religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So that's the way I see it. So some people also try to rationalize and see the holy guardian angel as one's own kind of higher self, manifested as a separate being. But in my experience, like 15 years after the Abramelin experiment, when I connect to my sort of higher self, which is my noetic sort of, it's not the same. Like for me, the holy guardian angel is still a separate being, which is more abstract. Like I saw it more like a kind of orb of light, or as a presence of holiness. But then it's more kind of surface inspiration. So we see like something that actually at a very high level that exists on different layers of reality, that can manifest through dreams, through inspiration, but also as a pure sort of intellectual inspiration. And what it does is that as people work with this holy guardian angel or invoking it, they are gradually, like the soul is lifted through these different layers. And until one reaches these kind of non-dual experiences, which, as I described, translated in the Neoplatonic tradition, would be just like the intellect, the mind, becoming aware of itself. Therefore, the subject and object become one. And then eventually through grace, because there's no way one can voluntarily experience the one, according to Plotinus and his students. It's only once we relinquish the will and therefore the desire to experience anything special that suddenly the one may eventually reveal itself, and that matches the sort of Zen type enlightenment experience in Buddhist tradition. So that was for me the holy guardian angel, and therefore my view on it is more in line with Iamblichus, Proclus, and the Neoplatonist than it is to the way Aleister Crowley understood it, or the way maybe more like Chaos Magician or other people see it now. Now, from there, so I see this as the real initiation of like Western occultism, of like the Golden Dawn or Aleister Crowley. I mean, because unlike like spells or all these things is like horizontal, but the invocation of the Holy Guardian Angel it leads to a true initiation, in the sense that there is a whole process of death and rebirth that is irreversible, that transform you forever. You're never the same person again after. Okay, and that I think is quite unique. So I think that what made Aleister Crowley unique in a way also is that he not only sort of mastered the Golden Dawn system, but he actually did the work of these old grimoires going back to the Greco Egyptian papyri rituals, like the boneless one, up to some Renaissance grimoires, or more like recent, such as the Abramelin. He did all this work, and when he did it, it actually worked and transformed his life in ways that he would never imagine before. So anyway, so that's for the Holy Guardian Angel, my take on it. I mean, I can talk about it for hours, but that's like a short summary. Then from Alan on, I started working with, I think was his second student, was an American lady who had been an anthropologist, specialized into the religions of Cuba and Caribbean. And I didn't know that in the beginning, so we started talking about all kind of stuff. And she started to tell me that she has been initiated as a priestess of Santeria and knows quite a lot about these traditions that are very sort of close practices. So it's almost impossible to know more than just a few books on the topic, but then the only way to know about it is to be part of the culture and learn this kind of through oral and through participating to the anyway. So she started. I was so interested by this, and she said, "Okay, like if you want to see, just try. Like you take some shells, different number of candles, and and then I give you this prayer in some African dialect." And you just do the practice and you see what you experience, And I started to get in touch with Yemaya, which is a Orisha, a kind of god of this tradition. And from there, she took me from some of the main of these sort of African gods that migrated to the Caribbean. And with her, actually, I learned a lot about like working with spirits. I think like each tradition have their specialty. So I would say like somebody interested into like energy work, like the Chinese, like Qigong, Neigong, Neda, they are like the masters in that field, how to shape energy, move it around and all this. If it's about like mantras, like the Indians are the best, like they know like all the details of a mantra, the nyasa, how to. The Africans, they are great about working with spirits. I mean, it's just like part of their culture. What they say are somebody spiritual is basically a medium for them. Is somebody can talk to spirits. So I learned a lot with her, and it taught me actually that regardless of the status that we give to these orishas, gods, or spirits, from a metaphysical point of view, from a pure kind of phenomenological perspective, we can't deny that they have a kind of independent intelligence, that they can actually jump from one person to another, because in this tradition people get like possessed in a way, or the spirits ride them, so we can see how they can actually within one ceremony pass from one person to another and jump, and relate in a way that's coherent between different people. So it sort of negated the prevalent idea back then from chaos magic and all that everything is just like psychology in the mind, but that nothing of this is real in the sense of having some kind of independent, non-physical, intelligent beings. So this changed my perspective on the topic and taught me a lot. From there, we together explored the traditional Renaissance grimoires. Why? Because the interesting thing is that the sort of Golden Dawn took a different approach with like visualizations and theatrical, what are these rituals, but it's funny that those balloons come on my screen as I'm talking about something theatrical, but like the Renaissance magic is more related to the more like kind of Catholic rituals where every item is purified and consecrated. So there's not much moving around, but more about purifying and consecrating candles, salt, making holy water, and proceeding through the rituals in that way. So, and the use of materials, they're not taken symbolically. They are really, I mean, sometimes they have a symbolic meaning, but often it's real, and you understand why and how it works through, actually, these African traditions are helpful because they make you understand, since they are more like animistic, they have a similar view of seeing a, like, I don't know, like if you want to contact the death currents, like dead or talk to ancestors, they will take dirt from a cemetery. So because they believe that this cemetery dirt is infused or connected to the current of death and of, so and in the same way, like we talked about Venus later, like copper as a material is connected to Venus, so they would use like copper or something. So seeing how these traditions work from their sort of African animistic roots, and how they also, through the Spanish or Portuguese people in the Caribbean or Brazil, because Santeria, you have the equivalent in Brazil with candomblé. There was also a dialogue with full Catholicism and Western witchcraft. Sometimes you see our grimoires being used in the Caribbean or in Brazil or New Orleans, hoodoo, voodoo traditions, root work, in a way that was actually unknown to the sort of modern Golden Dawn type bridge magicians. For me, it's more familiar because in France, we were late in French to translate these Anglo-Saxon material, and therefore French magic until quite recently was mostly based on those grimoires, which are part like folk Catholicism or the Martinist tradition that we find in France. So that's was also something I was more familiar with. So we explored all that with this person, and she actually, it's very interesting because doing all this and then working with also like angels and saints and through these rituals of this grimoire that was in some cases written down by lower clergy, I think, like those exorcists during the sort of Middle Age Renaissance time. Before priesthood, there were some kind of subordinations and like acolytes and exorcists, and these people were in charge of taking care of basically blessing and getting rid of negative influence. So anyway, through that, we started also exploring Catholic mysticism, and she actually converted to Catholicism and became a Catholic mystic. And so I've tried to contact her. I've not been able to find her recently, but she really went deeply into that. And her description when I read the journal was like reading like Saint Teresa of Avila or something. I mean, she had this amazing like visionary and mystical experiences that are just wonderful. So anyway, so that was that part. Then I explored further. Like I learned all the like technical skills, so like all my like spellcraft, how to like spell jars, candle spells, all these things to get like real effective results, not only for myself but for third parties. So that's when I really learned like the craft in the sense of like witchcraft. Was around that time. Then, if I try to remember the way it went, then I explored different things, but I became more involved with work actually. But I was also part of some kind of like Martinist. I was trying to get back into my more like Western tradition, trying to find something within which I could find a home. But actually, unfortunately, didn't work. I'm not made for that, so I could not really fit into something like ready-made, into an existing tradition. And from there, I started to like go back to more the kind of Hindu Buddhist side. And I had the opportunity to receive some Tantric Buddhist Tantric empowerments from like Glenn Mullen and Lama Lina. And through that also understand the way sort of what we would call magic in the way I described it applies in the Buddhist context. I also not really like studied from more theoretical point of view, but like when I was traveling in Thailand around that time also, because it's something like people don't know much if they haven't traveled in these countries. Like when you see the way Theravada Buddhism is presented in the West as a very sort of rational, technical system based on, in those countries, magic plays a huge role. I mean, you've traveled to Thailand, I guess, or some of these countries. You can see how everything, you've got these amulets and they're made with all kind of like bones of oils from human bodies, and they are connected to spirits, and people like outside their house, they have their spirit house, and like the whole of Thailand is like, it's like Bali, it's full of spirits everywhere, and some of these people are really experts in like crafting these amulets and stuff. So, and in the tantric system, I saw the way it works in Buddhism, um, in tantric Buddhism, which is basically after the um, generation stage, when one gets a kind of real connection with one's yidam. Um, then there is this fire puja and all this, and some people, like especially the Nakpas, sort of specialize in those rituals that use like mantras in a way to generate energy from a divine, um, from this divine connection, and then to use it to project it in different ways in order to pacify, to increase, to magnetize, or to cut and destroy, which can apply to destroying passions, destroying ego, destroying, in this understanding. So, or severing, or exorcise something. So that's the way they work. The system is similar to the Hindu system that I also studied, because I had contacts with. I mean, I received some kind of remote initiation within the Nath tradition, but I don't think it's like I don't know the validity, because normally it's not like, the initiation to the tantric system. It's very like a long process, and for the highest Logya Tantra is like 4 stages, long rituals and stuff. Often in the tantric system of India, like the Hindu more, Shakta or Shaiva, it's mostly a kind of, the first initiation is a mantra initiation. So you receive, like, the teacher gives you the mantra 3 times in the right ear, and that can be done on the phone. And you are sort of initiated, you receive the Shakti and the Diksha, the empowerment of the mantra in this manner. And then you receive some mantras that I'm not allowed to share because they are connected to one particular lineage. But anyway, so through that, regardless of whether it's, I mean, I would not like present myself, as like as belonging to the Nath Sampradaya. The fact is also is that the Nath is, on one side, it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest order of sadhus nowadays, which is not considered orthodox because it was not reformed by Shankaracharya, like the Nagababas are from the same root. But it's very interesting because the Nath, the founders of the Nath tradition, like Goraknath, is also one of the Mahasiddhas of the Buddhist tantric tradition. So we can see that we have the same root of these sort of magicians, the way we could present them from the way I describe this term, at the root of both Vajrayana and the Kola or Nath tantric traditions that are connected to yoga, the way the more like recent texts, like if you read like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it doesn't talk about chakras and nadis and all these things tantric, and that it's more connected to Goraknath and these guys basically. So the whole tantric system, Kundalini and all that, that's this tradition. And therefore, from there, I started to understand like the way the Indian system works. I don't know how much time we have, but it's most, they summarize it by saying like mantra, yantra, tantra. So mantra is like you start with all the signs of mantras, and this goes much deeper than any other tradition that inherited the Indian system, because those mantras are they are given, like the real classical mantras, they are given by a particular rishi. So the whole like Hindu religious system, um, Sanatana Dharma would be the more like the term that Indians like to use nowadays, because Hinduism is more like a kind of the way the Western scholars call the religions at the east of the Indus River. But they go back to 12 rishis, which also match the 12 signs of the zodiac, basically. But these rishis passed mantras. So a mantra is encrypted in a way, and each mantra has a rishi, has a bija, has a shakti, has a kilaka, and all that. And that's the way the mantra is passed on from one generation to another, from teacher to student, and that's how the mantra is used. Because normally the real way mantras are used is that one is to sort of there's a kind of ritual to unpack it and to place like the rishi on top of the head, and then the devata, so the deity, in the heart, and the meter, because each mantra has a meter. So the meter on the throat, and then the bija on the like lower belly, that's the seed of the mantra, and then the shakti on the feet, that's the power that makes it work, move. And the kilaka on the navel, normally, that's the kind of key that unlocks it. So it's a very complex, I mean, the way Hindu Tantras work is there's not much visualization, but you have all these procedures by which parts, like what I described, is placed in different parts of the body, and then each finger is energized with the derived from the root of the mantra, and then they are opposed in different places of the body to sort of like because the mantra is seen as the deity in sound form. And by placing these sounds within the energy body, the deity is made, we sort of harmonize the practitioner with the intelligence of the deity with whom one is working. And then when the whole, like the whole energy body is attuned with the mantra, then they would chant the mantra a certain number of malas for a certain number of days. And so that's the kind of thing that you learn, these kind of practices. It's a tantric upasana or sadhana. And from there, you learn to use yantras. So we go from mantra to yantra. Yantra is this geometric shapes. It's very interesting also to note that the yantras of the planets that Hindus use to correct some kind of problems around their birth charts match those that we see in the Key of Solomon of Western Magick, and those that people use in the sort of Muslim or Arabic magic systems. So we can see that these whole Indo-European traditions share a similar view of astrology. The Hindu system is very similar. You have the same planets, the same thing. They just have the north and south node of the moon as Ketu and Rahu, Ketu. But basically, the system are very similar. And these yantras are basically our magical squares and our seals, like the seals of Solomon. That's kind of yantra. In India, they are mostly encased within a kind of like a temple, like a mandala. Mandalas are basically yantras. Okay, so you've got this kind of square with the opening east, west, north, south, and within it you would have squares, triangles, and circles in different ways, and that is the symbolize basically the deity in visual form. Okay, so from a kind of purely sort of noetic intellectual principle, the deity sort of manifests first as a sound, that would be the mantra, and as a kind of original shape, like a kind of vibration on water, would create a kind of structure, visual structure. In the same way, the sound of the mantra would manifest as a geometric shape, which is the yantra. And the yantra is used also as a talisman. So actually what you do is that you would recite the mantra for a long time, and you can see the energy of the deity packing within your body. And then you can project it within the yantra to activate it and to infuse it with the energy of the deity. And then the yantra becomes a kind of icon or a kind of physical manifestation of the deity that sort of manifests its energy around you. And then from mantra, yantra, we go to tantra, and tantra in this sense is understood as the ritual process that allows you to either affect change, the way a spell would work in a kind of witchcraft type practice, or can be used for like evocation of spirits. So if they want to, for instance, like get in touch with a naga or a yakshini or different type of spirits, they would also have different processes to do that. And then you have the real like theurgic way, which is the normal, the sort of highest noble side of Tantra, which is the invocation of a deity through this process. Okay, so getting back to my experimentation with that, so I studied both the Buddhist system as well as I'm not an expert in all this, but I have kind of general knowledge as an insider, and the Hindu system. And what happened is that I got in contact with some people in India. One is an attorney in Calcutta, one is in Rajasthan, working for like a wildlife preservation thing. That actually, one is from the same sort of not subsect, Pant, they call it, and I'm the only person he knows, because basically in India he doesn't know many people from his own thing. That goes back to Ramnath Agor, who was a very famous Agori Nath yogi that became the advisor of the king of Nepal. And that studied also in Tibet, and so they have a connection, like the Ukala Chakra tantras are very important for them. It's interesting to see actually how even nowadays there are connections between the Hindu and Tantric and Buddhist Tantric tradition, at least from the Indian point of view. So anyway, so I did all that, and when I was working on these tantric sadhanas, this is when suddenly I did something very simple for Kali, and she suddenly appeared before me. Okay, so that's what I described in the first interview. So that's actually in line with what should happen in a tantric tradition. So just for people to understand, so the South Indian tantric tradition is like more like Sri Vidya, connected to the goddess Lalita, which is more connected also to Advaita Vedanta. I would say that it's most likely that Shankaracharya, that's the biggest like reformer and creator of what we call now Advaita Vedanta, was actually a tantric practitioner of Sri Vidya back then. Anyway, it's pretty much connected. It's very orthodox. It's more like right-hand path type of thing. In North India, the more like, and that goes back to maybe like 16th, 17th century, the most common tantric tradition nowadays is very secretive, by the way, is connected to the Dasmahavidya, so the 10 great wisdom goddesses. And this starts with Kali and then Tara, but not like the sweet Tara of Tibetan Buddhism, but the Ugra Tara, the Nila Sarasvati, the kind of dark blue, more wrathful or angry, Ugra, angry form. But who is also the savior. And then you get to Lalita Tripura Sundara, which is this kind of goddess of beauty, and then all the others like Dumvati and Bagalamukhi and all this Kamala. So there's a kind of order. So, but what's supposed to happen is that at some point during the practice, either when you complete a center, it's like the Tibetan system when you have to accumulate certain number of mantras, but it's more strict in the Hindu system. But at some point, if you succeed in your sadhana, suddenly you will get the darshan of the deity of the goddess. So this is what happened to me. Suddenly you have something like Kali appearing in front of you. Of course, it's a vision, but more like a kind of hallucination. I mean, it's like you have open eyes and you can see, boom, this. And normally she will ask you to make a vow. And in my case, that has, according to my Indian contacts, they told me that I was actually initiated by Kali into the Kola lineage. Okay, that's the way they sort of understand that. Because again, in these traditions, you receive like the diksha from the human guru, is like the authorization to practice, transmission of the mantra, but then the real initiation is only given by the goddess herself. And this is also something of interest if you see the stories of the Mahasiddhas, of the more like Buddhist tradition, but as I said, some of them also are not yogis, is that they're always initiated by a woman. It's always like a elderly woman or like a prostitute or barmaid or somebody. That is a kind of living embodiment of a Dakini or of a goddess. And because it's always the goddess that initiates. Okay, now I make it very short, but just for people to understand also why there's a common root is because in the Puranas, there's the story of Shiva that finds Brahma arrogant and turns or emanates Bhairava that chops the fifth head of Brahma to teach him to be like more humble. And I mean, if I summarize, and from there, since when you kill a Brahmin, you are supposed to be exiled, and the only way to be and in the old days, people who killed the Brahmin were exiled from the city, from the community, had to beg within a skull with a skull cup. That was the only item they could possess, and they used to beg with this. And then they had to wait for the Devi, for the goddess, to free them, to forgive them, to save them, so that they would be accepted back into the community. That was the old view back then. So from there, I don't know how it happened, but you had a tradition of like sadhus connected to this myth of Bhairava and of begging in a skull cup and holding the trident of Shiva, and that used to roam around India, worshipping the goddess and embodying Bhairava as the wrathful aspect of Shiva. So these were called the Kapalikas, means the holders of the Kabbalah, the skull cup. And they are the roots of all tantric traditions, basically, in Buddhism and Hinduism nowadays. That this is why all the, like, Padmasambhava typically is a Kapalika. I mean, he's like holding the Khadvanga with the trident of Shiva, and he's holding the skull cup the Kabbalah. That's a typical item. And the goddess plays a big part because she's the initiator. That's the way it works. So now closing this parenthesis, like in my experience, what happened is that Kali sort of initiated me to this kind of tradition, which is more like left-hand path connected with the dark feminine. So I don't know how this whole thing happened, but it was part also of a process. I will talk about it later. We understand these things now. But I was then connected to other dark feminine archetypal intelligences, or so one of them that played a big part was Lilith, and the other one was Hecate. I talked about a bit before. And what followed was another type. I described the Abramelin Holy Guardian Angel process as the kind of initiation, like through the ascent, ascent through the different layers of the stars, where you suddenly ultimately like unite with the or experience the ultimate principle. And then this is like one type of initiation in the ancient Greek world. It's more like the Dionysus or someone, where the god is like split into parts, reunited, and presented to Zeus. I went more through the underworld initiation connected to the Orphic and illusion mysteries, connected to Persephone and the kind of dark goddess aspects, so which is something else this time. So here it was, of course, what happened in such cases is that your states is connected to dreams, connected to visions, connected to, there's a kind of psychological process one goes through at the same time. So, and it's also connected to people, like real people outside. So suddenly you will be contacted by people out of the blue that suddenly you discover have a connection to one of these dark goddesses, and you will go through some kind of like astral travels and so like waking up in the middle of the night with some kind of like pulled into some kind of dream imagery. And at the same time, you're doing all this kind of shadow work in the sense that what is, without going into details of how each of them work on that, but these kind of dark feminine divine archetypes are connected to the kind of shadow work side of like Jungian psychology, and they tend to bring to light all the unconscious, unprocessed material. So like all the kind of inner child wounds in modern terms, like all the like repressed desires, past sort of contracts, unintegrated traumas, or all that stuff just come back to the surface, and so everything is amplified, and that plays out in your outer life, in your inner life, in your, like, the whole thing sort of, external events match internal visions, match dreams, match meditation, spirit. The whole thing is sort of synchronized in such a way that you realize that it's not, you're going through a kind of real initiation. It's not just a kind of experience. It's a process that you need to go through. So for me, that took about over 2 years, I would say, the most dramatic side. Now things are settling down. I get into another phase. But it's interesting also because I think that the first part of my journey was more the kind of young in the Chinese sense, more like masculine, solar, and therefore my like teachers played a big role for me was Alan Chapman, who is this kind of Leo rising sign, from his astrology. Um, Very solar, very organized, rational, masculine. He's somebody very like self-driven, very organized, uh, and people like Kenneth Folk, also this very sort of technical type of practice. So I was really into this, and that's also matched like the first part of my sort of more like professional private life, which was more oriented towards like real life achievement, career, becoming like a partner and senior and co-owner of a law firm, this kind of thing. So that was like the masculine side, and what's this kind of tantric and then encounter with this sort of dark feminine archetypes was more connected to the feminine side, and therefore for me it matched the sort of greater or sudden like big opening of psychic senses, allowing me to see spirits and deities, to talk to regardless of whether they are real or not, but as a kind of subjective phenomenological experience. That's how it feels. Like you have suddenly like I don't know, I would call like Ganesh, I would give an offering and I would see him appearing and his trunk just like taking one like sweet, putting it in his mouth, and then like petting my head with his trunk, this kind of a visionary experience with open eyes. So with just like a small like candles around me, you see all these things, you can talk to them, you can hear them talk back, you can feel them like physically, it was like really like developing relationships. So it was more into like feelings, all the more like feminine side that had not developed much before was suddenly sort of boosted. And that was connected to a lot of sort of material, suddenly some kind of old memories of childhood, some kind of very sort of emotional material would come out. And also like developing, as I said, this kind of relationship with these entity or something that is not the kind of more like kind of bargaining but more like kind of friendship, or in some case even like romantic type relationship. So that was something very interesting. I mean, it's still happening, but it's something very interesting. And the more like bargaining type, I can say, because it's kind of, I mean, the purpose here is not to tell like stories or too much. Some are too personal, but it's kind of fun. But I actually did at some point in connection with like Kali and these Das Mahavidyas. Another one is Chinnamasta. Chinnamasta is actually very much connected to Vajrayogini. They have the same mantra, so they're basically the same. Like Vajrayogini is an aspect of Chinnamasta, but Chinnamasta is shown more as like she cuts her own head and holds her head, and the end is free. Like blood, and which is the central channel, left and right, the Pingadanadi. But that's like chopping of ego and all this. So, which is very fierce deity. So I was like working with these, and at the same time, when you start working with the kind of dark feminine, you are not only faced with your own subjective fears, but also confronted to very dark entities. And through this, you are actually journeying through hell, basically, So like around like Lilith, and she can appear in different aspects, but she actually not only activates and sort of brings to light all the darkest thing about ourselves that we don't want to see or are just like unaware of exist. And that's very humbling also, because I think a lot of people, when they had some kind of spiritual, you think like you're above some kind of things, and it can seem so, because if you're not like somebody living, in the mountain and you feel that you don't have any lust, you don't have any greed, you don't have, but then so these dark goddesses, they sort of show you what's there, and they're all about honesty, they're all about truth, they're all about integrity. They're all about, that's their thing. So their morals is not so much like eat this, don't eat that. It's different. It's about being real. It's about accepting all our failures, the thing we're not proud of, the thing we're maybe ashamed of. We need to embrace that. So that's the real shadow work, the way Jung explains it. We need to become aware of it, to bring it to light, and to sort of embrace it in a way that, like, ultimately, it's kind of people go through this. There's no way to blackmail them. Like, you become completely transparent with yourself and therefore with others. It's like there's nothing to hide, nothing that's not really like accepted about oneself, and that gives a different type of confidence that comes from inside. So that's like Lilith is pretty much about that, and about boundaries and about refusal. Like you get this kind of inner confidence, and therefore also when to say no, how to set boundaries with people, with things. That's pretty much the way it works working with her. Hecate is different. It's more the kind of threshold crossing, opening, closing doors, the access to the spirit world, closing, and making sure everything is like closed and safe, and there's no penetration of subconscious or visionary material when you don't want to. So that's the key symbol. The torch symbol is also like to bring light into darkness, and darkness of our own subconscious and conscious mind. And also she's at the crossroads. So it's often she manifests to people in their life when they are at the bottom, so you go through some personal crisis and you're just in the dark. You have nothing to lose anymore, but you don't know if you need to go left or to go right. So you are this kind of crossroad where, like a Y, and that's the place of Hecate symbolically. And she will not force anything, because unlike Lilith, who's more like daimonic, the way the Greek understood it, like this kind of Chthonian daimon, who is more shares like human feelings of sometimes like can be like possessive, angry or sad. Or Hecate is typically a chthonic, yes, but kind of goddess of a different order, and therefore she's more kind of abstract principle, which manifests with symbols that poets and priests and sages of antiquity gave to her. And then, of course, as time evolves, also like pop culture can also influence the way they manifest to us, because our individual subconscious and the collective unconscious gives shape to these energies in a way. But Hecate is different. It's a different type of things that you learn. But anyway, through these and through this experience, of course, it doesn't mean like the whole work is finished, but that's like a big, like a big part is experienced during that time. You not only face all your personal fears, but also the fears of different types of spirits. And therefore, nowadays, I'm not afraid of contacting any kind of, or dealing with, negotiating with, if needed, any kind of dark spirits, either in the Western world, so like the 72 sort of demons, or of the Goetia, the Lesser Key of Solomon, or the sort of infernal hierarchy of the Abramelin, or so in this way it completes actually the Abramelin side, because I never did the last part when it's supposed to to invoke and then to bind the kind of completely infernal hierarchy, you know. And also I did that with getting back to the tantric system at the root of the Kabbalah tradition with some of the 64 yoginis. And that was so interesting because you get those, like the way in Vajrayana they depict Dakinis, you know, like sometimes it's like very symbolic, but still they are seen as this kind of like very kind of angelic beings in a way. But actually these kind of yoginis, dakinis, when you really interact with them like you do with spirits in the Western occult tradition, they are super fierce. I mean, the first time I contacted one, she basically knocked me down like in meditation. Like the energy gets so intense, and suddenly like I fell down on the floor and I was like lying down, you know, like as if I was like knocked down during boxing. So they are like super intense. They are like they've got a mix of like eros and thanatos. You know, it's like these symbols of sex and death. They are very witchy. They are and difficult to work with, basically. So the only way is to invoke the energy of like Kali or Bhairava, means that Shiva in a kind of wrathful aspect, which is like Chakrasambhava is basically a kind of Buddhist form of Bhairava. So you need actually to embody this energy in order to sort of gain authority on these, and gradually you can befriend them. And when you befriend them, they can become suddenly super sweet. So they go from this kind of super bitchy, witchy type beings into these kind of super sweet, girly creatures that can sort of take you into some kind of visionary experiences or astral travels. I had some in some Himalayan caves, some in what looked like more like tropical jungle temples, pretty much like what I'd seen in Bali and what I saw later in Bali, actually, because I have not been there. So that was very interesting. And with them, you actually bargain, you promise that thing. So there's a way I found, like one of them has the name in Sanskrit that shows that she sort of initiates people to the system of the 64 yoginis. So I used her to actually initiate me and present me to the others, and then gradually you make your way through it. So it's kind of fun work. But anyway, so what all this gave me, now we come to like more now. So I was like connected to a lot of people, especially women. So that's why most of my sort of friends in that field now are women. Some very young, some are great at like channeling, which is something I can do in some way, but some of them are just like I have one friend who lives in East Europe, but she's from like a Central Asian country. She has this amazing skill, like she can contact one of these or even my higher self, or dig into past life memories and get back to me with like from 12 to, in one case, 41 full pages of super accurate information. And what's so interesting is that some completely unrelated people good at that, another one in the US, she can give me the same information from a different perspective, or what comes next. So you can see it's not only and that's very important in, as I said, also one thing is the experience, So you can get all these kind of fascinating, flashy, intense, raw experiences. But then there's a time to sit back and reflect on that and clarify what's true, what's not, what makes sense, what you can integrate, what's useful, what's ethical, So it's very important to have a network of people, because we're not good in every different fields. And in order to check experiences, to make sure, or to sort out what is purely subjective, what has some kind of, at least not objective, but maybe interpersonal or transpersonal meaning, and gradually sort of make sense to it. So what this whole journey allowed me to do, basically, that was missing, and that's gets back to the beginning, more connected to Aleister Crowley's idea of true will, is that it's provided me a lot of information, either directly or through third parties, about what I understand as past lives. And it's very interesting also because some people that didn't know me, didn't have context, gave me information about past lives that have themes to which I've been confronted in this very life. As if like you have to overcome or to face one challenge, and it comes back again and again until you pass the test in a way. I've been in contact with psychics, including also people that I knew from work, like clients or something. Normally I never talked about these things, but since I knew they were into that, I started to open up more. And then I started to get a lot of, I've got this former client who's super psychic, and I can just think about somebody and she would give me information about that person. And in some cases, it's like baffling. So anyway, so I've got this network. I checked information, and then myself like went through experiences and stuff. In different ways, I came to understand sort of where I come from, what are the most important things I've done in what we could understand of past life, if we believe in that, and what is actually my sort of soul purpose, and who are the sort of archetypal non-physical intelligences or deities with whom I have a connection since a long time. So what changes suddenly after all this, I mean, like me now compared to me 2 years ago, is that I don't need to fit within any existing tradition. I don't need to play the roles that people normally think they should have, like either like a teacher or healer or whatever, because my purpose and role is something that doesn't fit clearly existing sort of archetypal or common sort of functions or careers, I could say, in some way. And I started to, so I don't know how much time we were going to wrap this up. So just briefly, my interest now, I started to get back to the first thing I talked about, namely like philosophy, like astrology. I actually, my regret is that I didn't go earlier deeply into astrology. I think that's the only thing, or the main thing, for which AI can really bring something interesting for astrology, is because through the access to big data, the computing capacity, and the ability to synthesize information, like the super complex information, I have found a way to actually, like, based on, to explain briefly, because that can be of interest for people to think about this, like through the analysis of my own birth chart, I gave some information about dates of important shifts in my life. And then from that, I tried to re-engineer or process what made those changes or shifts happen, okay? And what I found is that the slow-moving planets like Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and in Saturn, I would say, slow-moving, whenever they transit and interact with my either sun sign or rising sign or a cluster of planets in the same sign, that will trigger changes. And what happens, it's interesting because it goes to all these maps and this thing into, is that like Pluto is a force of death and rebirth. So when Pluto interacts, is this Plutonian force is like you go through this kind of death rebirth process of initiation. When Neptune interacts, it's more this kind of permeability where suddenly the sort of subconscious and conscious start to merge. So the sense of self may either like dissolve on, or one may get overwhelmed by some unconscious process or some kind of visionary mediumnic or psychic experiences. That's the Neptunian type initiation or change. And Uranus is more the kind of like Zen sudden enlightenment thing. It's kind of disruptive, sudden change of consciousness that reconfigures the self. So I sort of used this and fine-tune a system that allows me, actually, I'm sort of working on creating a system of spiritual astrology that is not focused on either predicting real-life events like more some Indian astrologists are interested in, nor about the analysis of the personality, like the Western sort of psychological astrology, but using the same Western astrology, I'm working on a system that allows to analyze the birth chart of a person to see how your system works as a system, like system theory, how as an individual from our mental, psychic, nervous system, everything, we process spiritual practice and spiritual experiences. I mean, and therefore, like the same practice, that's the sort of hypothesis, is that the same spiritual practice can have a complete different effect on different individuals because their system works differently. I mean, some people, to make a very simple, brief example, some people are made and benefit a lot from this kind of super intense Kundalini type or Tummo type practices. For some other people, it can completely destroy them. In a similar way, some people are made for the more kind of non-dual, abstract or type practices like Advaita Vedanta or Zen or Dzogchen. Some people are made more for devotional. And this shows according to the element balance. So there's a way to really go very deeply into that, and I find it absolutely fascinating. Now, another subject of interest is alchemy, because here also, I'm seeing alchemy as the process of transformation. So it explains how matter transforms, but also how we as individuals go through a kind of process of initiation through the phases of a kind of calcination, dissolution, dismembering, separation, reunification, purification, this whole process of the black, white, and black work, or the 7 stages. And I realized that actually every spiritual shift, regardless of whether it's a pure kind of non-dual type awakening or a kind of sudden sort of psychic or confrontation with deities or whatever, it's always actually the similar process. Like we go also through the same similar phase, So So yeah, so these are some of my current interests.
Wow, Alex. That was fantastic. So I have a couple of questions. Well, many actually, but I'll prioritize here a bit. The first is, you've described very much here in the later stages of this presentation what you've been using magic for. What you've been using, what has been the effect for you? Confronting shadows, for example, and these other kinds of results. I'm curious, at the beginning, starting at the beginning, what drew you to magic in the first place? And did that change? Some people look at magic indeed as a sort of spiritual path. Alan Chapman, we can say, certainly in that camp. Others say, actually, no, it's definitely not a spiritual path. It's about achieving various results. For example, health, wealth, relationships, that sort of thing. What drew you to magic in the first place? When you were working with the Western esoteric tradition and so on, what was your motivation? To what ends did you put your practice?
Okay, yeah, I get the idea.
Etc. And did it change over time?
Actually, it didn't change much. Why? Because my motivation was not about practical result-oriented magic in the sense of like witchcraft, and it was more like I trust my own skill to go about life, for relationship or work or finance. But I was basically, okay, I think to try to understand it in a way that makes sense. I was basically looking, exploring Asian traditions, Hindu, Buddhist, in order to understand my own, in a way, Western tradition. And I was not able to find this in mainstream Christianity, but was, however, aware that that had been at least partially a part of it. I think why my ancestors converted to Christianity in the first place, that they found something that they didn't find, in their own, or that was similar, or, in some way. So, and we can see from the life of saints, from all these, like the people we talked to, John Dee, or these kind of people, they were mainstream in a way. They were not like, like hunted, and so that was part of our culture. But for me, it was a way to get back to that and to understand that. Okay, so that was the main. So my purpose was to find a kind of full Western spiritual tradition that gave all the things that I could find in a living tradition, unbroken, in places like India or Tibet or some Asian countries. So that's the motivation. And the authors that interested me in the first place were Franz Bardon, the Czech author of like Initiation to Hermetics, and something that is, in my opinion, the most complete training system for anybody who wants to do this systematically. Just an amazing book. And the new English translation is much better. So like the old one seemed to be roughly translated from German, so it didn't sound so good. And another one was Aleister Crowley. Why? Because Aleister Crowley, actually, what I saw in his system was basically a kind of Western Tantra. It's Western Tantra, taking parts from Indian yogas and stuff, but within a more European framework. So that was the interest. However, when you learn about it, of course, spells and real results thing is part of it. And therefore, I also learn how to manifest or change the course of events in a way, or do some work. What I still do now, I must say, is protection work. Like Nowadays, you've got those crazy people on also places like TikTok and all this who would like curse anybody for no reason, and so I've people around me who've suffered from that, or people who have some kind of ghostly or weird thing happening in their home, and so I still do protection work from a distance. That does work. It's like the next day or 2 days later, finished. So that's the kind of thing. Otherwise, like divination is extremely useful, and that's something, unfortunately, that's only sometimes like teachers, specialists do in Eastern traditions, but it allows you to be autonomous and to understand where you are and what's the best thing for you to do at certain. It gives clarity.
Do you use entities and your relationships with those for your protection work? And that's one method. There are other methods too, energy methods and so on, various different ways. What's your methodology for that?
Okay, so of course, protection is a kind of broad term, but like against curses and negative spirits. So there's a pure energy work way, is like you sort of condense energy into your body. You, just to explain for people, you create a kind of energy ball, like a cheap ball within your hands, and there you can create like shape or with intention this energy ball into a shield, which can be layered. So you can have different layers to the shield, like to protect against direct attack or some kind of vampiric, some entities or people trying to steal energy from you, or you can like shield your mental space so that people can't access your thoughts through psychic means, all these kind of things. And so you can layer this shield, infuse different type of energies into it, and then you program it to activate with a specific keyword, for instance, like a kind of Reiki attunement. So every time you say Reiki, you feel the Reiki. So every time you say like shield or something, you the shield, and you sort of put it around you. You program it in a certain way to like also sort of re-energize via ambient energy or this kind of thing, and to activate for a certain number of hours. So you work. That's pure kind of energy manipulation. Okay, that's a way, especially for oneself. But then I could also like create a shield for somebody else and transmit that to a person as if pretty much like a kind of Reiki remote empowerment. Okay, or attunement. Now, for protection, like against a curse or people, when somebody is plagued by negative entities, one part can be a kind of, so yeah, I mostly work with the Archangel Michael for that. Sometimes I wait for Sunday on the hour of the sun. So like the perfect timing, I use like a picture of the person, 4 candles in a cross, blessed salt. I use the Roman ritual. I've got this 17th century manual of exorcism with all this. So I use the kind of more like Catholic traditional in Latin to bless the salt. I use rue, the herb, Ruda graveolens in Latin, which is very protective. And basically, and some oil, like the kind of what in Hoodoo they would call like fiery wall of protection oil. So these are like magical oils. So I know how to make it, but sometimes it's cheaper and easier to just buy it. So when I was for a business trip to San Diego, I know this very powerful lady. She's like 75 now, and I bought it there. So it's kind of magical oil. So I anoint the candles with this fiery wall protection oil. I use all these blessed salt things, to create a kind of shield, a bit like a kind of like the magical circle, people during these kind of goetic evocations. And then I contact Michael, the Archangel Michael, make sure he agrees to help me with this. And then I sort of invoke his energy within my body, and then I infuse it, a bit like what I described with the yantra. I infuse it into the person and the ritual items, and I visualize the person I'm working for being sort of completely cleansed, like shining with bright solar energy from a spine to the whole body, the whole aura, and being sort of protected by a shield, kind of dome of energy and fiery, this kind of visualization to using symbols to direct intention and intention into the working. And I do this, like I did this like once for somebody who was haunted, had some kind of hauntings in an apartment in Paris. I did it for somebody who had received a kind of death type curse, who was feeling completely exhausted. Her eyes were becoming like watery, or like she was like losing her psychic skills. And like sometimes people can be really attacked like by nasty people. And within like 24 to 48 hours, gone. But in some case, I repeat for like second, third, fourth day, this kind of thing. So that's basically my work for protection. Sometimes it involves the cutting of cords. So Hecate told me how to do it. Is like if like somebody has some kind of energy attachment to one negative entity, or it can be also people want to do a kind of cord cutting against a kind of toxic past relationship or something. They want to cut any kind of psychic connection between themselves and their ex-partner, whatever, is that I sort of visualize, like in Reiki, sometimes like if you visualize the patient, so I imagine the person is there, and then I sort of set the intent to see the connection with the other person or entity. And I will have a vision where I see these two people and I see some kind of lines of like bright light. So sometimes some are grayish, is there other connections that I don't need to cut. But then when I will ask to see those that are connected to that specific other person from A to B, between A to B, I will see a kind of bright connection between them on different parts of their bodies. So in some cases, like there was a girl that had some connection with some incubus and this kind of sexual vampiric demonic entity. So I saw for her, it was like the connection was in the back of her neck and the shoulder blade, as well as the sexual organs. In some other, it can be through the heart or to like different parts of the body. And then I use a kind of dagger that I received from Hecate, and with that I cut and repair. It's like microsurgery, you're sort of repairing and cutting these things, and that's the way also. So these are basically like the three things I'm telling you is basically the work I do for that, yeah.
Is psychic attack or demonic entity oppression an occupational hazard? Is it the sort of thing that working in these realms makes one more prone to encounter? It strikes me that the idea of being cursed or so, it's not something that people encounter really every day. It's not something that one finds coming one's way every day.
So I would say the people with whom I've worked recently are people who are mediumnic, psychic. One is a Sufi, but with inborn incredible astral projection skills. But she's not at all into magic the way like this kind of thing, which is haram, which is forbidden for a Muslim, like she's a real Muslim. The others are more like magical witchy type practitioners. So I would say that maybe somebody like super rational and with no is in a way protected by that, in some way. or may not see and understand it as a psychic attack, and therefore assume it's just they're going through some depression or some, but it will manifest in a different way. Like they will not maybe like wake up in fright in the middle of the night and see some kind of dark shadow stuff around them. This will not happen to them, but they may go through some kind of mental or physical kind of difficult period, at least. But I think also that such curses are rare in the West, and it's more between competing people within the kind of witchcraft market, you see. However, if you travel to African, Southeast Asian, or Latin American countries, this is more common. I mean, as I said maybe before, but like my grandmother was from Brazil, I've known people from Brazil. In Brazil, it's pretty common, especially like, I don't know, like if you have a Brazilian girlfriend, after any breakup, you can be sure to get some kind of curse. You know, it's like they will have friends or know somebody and they will try to do something. So either like a curse to get back together or to give you some kind of trouble. It's very common in Brazil. Yeah, so I think it's less prevalent in our countries unless one is within a kind of community or subculture where these things are common between people competing against each other, basically.
You mentioned this motivation to make contact with, rediscover an authentic Western tradition, and that your journeys in the East, practice journeys and travel journeys as well, was in a sense to serve that motive. I'm curious, why attempt that? Why not, as so many have done, go to the East and stay there? If not physically, then at least in terms of your practice. Why not, for example, simply become a Buddhist or a Nat Yogi or something like that?
I think some of it is related to my personality and what I understood to be also something at the very core of the origin of my soul and past life. I'm somebody made to be sort of in between, never part of anything. It's part of my sort of the way my system works. But beside that, from a more kind of rational point of view, my problem with that, like I've got a cousin who became a sadhu in India and lived for like 2-3 years in India as a Nagababa sadhu in Madhya Pradesh. The problem is that you have visa issues, like at the time of Aleister Crowley with the British passport, you were at home in any of these countries because that was part of the empire. It's not anymore the case. So in his case, you have 3 months and then you can extend to 6 months visa. And then he needed to travel to Nepal or Thailand and then come back for another 6 months. It's after 2-3 years, it's a problem, and the thing is that these traditions, in order to really start to learn that type of stuff, you really need to be like deeply into them. You need to speak the language. You need to live, to share, to sometimes marry somebody from the country. So it's a huge involvement. And at one point, you need to get back to your own country. And when you do, it's very complicated. So either you become one of these small sort of teacher of Eastern stuff, but then you need to turn it into some kind of business because otherwise you can't survive financially. And therefore you lose the spirit. Like if I wanted to be a real like Nakpa, I would need to learn Tibetan. I would need to go to like Amdo or some nomadic places where they have this Nakpa culture, tribal thing. I would need to be accepted by them. as a barbarian foreigner, demonic Westerner or something, the way people can see you from these small villages. I would need to follow a kind of apprenticeship for maybe 10, 12, 15 years to become recognized as somebody who can really do some work for people. So it's a huge involvement. It's difficult. The other problem is the symbolic system. Like, I really love the Chinese system of development, energy development, and magic. But the Chinese system is symbolically so alien and different from the sort of Indo-European logic that it's very difficult if you're not born in the culture, because it's not only things you can read about, you can learn about, you need, first of all, to master the language. You need to, Chinese, the problem is that, for me, like in French, in order to really master the language, you will need to learn French, Latin, and Greek, because that gives you the kind of complete access to the literature that forms the modern culture. From a Chinese point of view, it's the same Chinese, but the language evolved. So it's like a bit like Greek, like modern Mandarin Chinese does not allow you, if you can read a newspaper, to read like Lao Tzu, which is a kind of ancient Chinese that uses words with different meaning. So, and Chinese, like Greek, one word can have 5 or more different meanings depending on the context. All that to say that it's practically impossible logistically, economically, legally, but also our own Western culture, the way we are brought up, the way we are fed with the art, the literature, the thing. My father read me all the Greek mythology. He brought me to all the art museums in Europe. So my subconscious is structured with these cultural symbolic system. Yeah. And therefore my unconscious, my dreams, speak with this symbolic language. If I was a Tibetan political refugee or somebody who lived in Switzerland, I would maybe have Tibetan dreams. I would dream about, Majra Yogini and some yakshas, or it would be different. So I would say for magic, unlike, you can become a real practitioners of like Zen Buddhism that will be taken seriously in Asian countries. I see that because I was this summer in China in some very famous Zen temples. They take me seriously as a foreigner. Okay. I'm not a monk, but still they talk to me. They brought me to I was allowed to meditate in their place where nobody, if you're not a monk, it's just impossible to even look inside. They take you seriously. But as far as magic, this type of thing is concerned, it's complicated. If you're not, yeah.
Having explored now the Tibetan Tantric system, that, if you want, version of Indian Buddhist Tantra, filtered through that Tibetan pathway, and also having explored so-called Hindu Tantric systems, I wonder if you have any reflections on the comparative efficacy of those systems, perhaps in terms of awakening, but certainly in terms of magic, our subject today.
So the Tibetan one is extremely broad and complex. And so it's difficult also to separate the sort of, because the highest yoga tantra is so complex. You have the generation stage, you have it becomes basically a kind of invocation of the yidam you work with or you're connected to. And from there you have these enlightened activities, or which is the kind of magical practice. with fire pujas, like Havan type of practices, and like in the West, you've got like Reynolds, Vajanat. I took a few courses with him. Like on a Saturday, he has this online, reading transmissions and stuff, and he got some material. So I understand more or less how it works, but it's too complex for me to really turning into a fully usable system to do all the things I can do with the ways I'm used to. The Indian tantric system, the thing that has been a problem for me is that a lot of Tibetan material has been translated into English or Western languages. So the texts are more easily available. In the Indian tantric tradition, the problem is that almost nothing is translated. So my friends in India, they would say, okay, I have this great book, but it's in Hindi. Can you use AI or something to translate it? So they give me the 700 pages treaty in Bengali or Hindi or something. It's very complicated to use. And we need, partly there's also written transmission. In Europe, we have these grimoires and things that allow things to pass from one generation to another, or at least even if it was broken, not transmitted by a structured order. So, but I would say that with the Indian system, I can easily do the same kind of practical thing, because it's basically the way I work in, like what I described with Michael. You basically do the same thing. Sometimes they use different herbs or different, but it's pretty much the same. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. That's why the core principles are very similar all around the world, which shows that it's not only cultural. There's this kind of operational thing to it.
How widespread do you think, and well understood, are these operational principles in, say, the professional clergy of these religious systems, Tibetan lamas, for example?
Frankly speaking, I never, beside the lamas I mentioned, who's a Western, and Lama Lina, who, by the way, I don't know if you know Lama Lina like personally, but maybe the name. She's very interesting because her father, like she's from a New York Jewish family. Her father was deeply into like super dark occult stuff. She says that her father was collecting demons, basically. But so she was brought up into this environment. Her father, actually, the one thing she took from her father is lucid dreaming, which now becomes her expertise in the field of dream yoga. So she teaches Dzogchen, which is her main thing, and Mahamudra. But personally, she has been a Wiccan priestess then in New York. Then she traveled to India, where she got some real siddhis living with like sadhui, like female sadhus or something in the jungle for some time. And she was using her spiritual powers actually to sort of make a living, and then she lost them somehow. And because of that, she got an interest because she met a famous Tibetan Lama, and she was looking for something that doesn't go away. And that's how she came to Dzogchen. That's very interesting. So, but basically, Lama Lina is or has been a real kind of Western occultist, witch, and everything. So she's very familiar with this, and you can talk about it with her in private, So anyway, that's my only sort of limited experience with them. So I don't know, like normal lamas, I don't know. But what I know is that, like, I knew a kind of shaman who was invited by, like the Dalai Lama some 20-something years ago started this kind of, what he called, like, there was a tent with like the circle of the ancient tradition or something, where he invited some kind of representative of sort of shamanic type traditions around the world. I don't know if you've heard about that. And so that person took part in that. And because of that, he was contacted by a very famous Tibetan teacher, Lama, in France, there was a Dakini that refused to leave the temple, basically, space. So in these cases, they hire specialists. And so he was hired by this Lama. He had to actually receive empowerments to learn some rituals in Tibetan and all that, and do this shamanic work for them. Same with Lama Lina, if you ask. Some people have some specific problems. They will guide them to more like some burn type practitioners that she knows are good for some particular thing. Working with like spirits problems or some kind of lung, some kind of energy, like Kundalini symptom problems due to energy imbalances. So to answer in one sentence, they mostly subcontract to specialists because they have them handy. And I think that's what they do in Tibet or nowadays in North India, is that they have oracles, they have ritual specialists, that they have some kind of specialists of like shamanic exorcism type of thing. So they would just like ask these people to help when needed.
I suppose it's a bit like when you hire a plumber, isn't it? It's not that, technically speaking, you couldn't do it yourself.
You can learn plumbery, but like myself, I don't do it because last time I tried to repair the sink, the thing broke down on a Sunday morning and I could not hire anybody to help. So in the same way, and also for practitioners like myself, I subcontract work, or I work with a network, because some people are much better than me for like divination work or channeling or some type of spellcraft. So you need a network, you need a group of people around you, because you can't be good at everything. And I think it's the same, like a Tibetan Lama, his role is like either like a scholar or transmit some practices. He's not supposed to be a specialist of exorcism or something like that. It's,
What do you think is the interaction between natural talent, lineage, biological lineage? One often hears of that, gift running in the family, for example. And just, if you like, the power of technique, the power of understanding a system, mastering or gaining proficiency in certain core techniques, building certain traits, power of concentration, for example. I suppose it's the interaction between talent, if we were to put it in that kind of a way, and acquired skill and technique.
You're a musician. I think it's like music. Like anybody can learn to play the guitar, basically, unless you're missing a hand or arm. But some will be better at it than others. And some like Jimi Hendrix are like self-taught geniuses. You see what I mean? Is that anybody can learn the basic, but some people are more skilled than others. So that's why my interest now for the type of astrology I'm developing is to identify, to see how our system works, and for what we have natural abilities, what is our grounding system, and in order to see what people are good at or will be good at, and what is the way for them to make it safe, right? You need a kind of grounding system, because it can be very destabilizing. And especially in the West, we are not part of a structured system, especially nowadays, all these magical orders and things have almost disappeared. So one is kind of alone, and one can be overwhelmed by sort of subconscious material, or spirits. So this kind of grounding part is very important, and avoid this kind of, as an example, I analyzed, without any data from his real biography, the birth chart of Aleister Crowley. Okay, Aleister Crowley has incredible inborn skills from his chart. Like, he has this capacity for activation, for receiving psychic material. He's got this amazing capacity also of translating his practice and experience into transmissible material. He has this amazing capacity to organize and structure groups and organizations that will sort of survive him. Okay. And he has a lot of Scorpio configurations that give him this natural familiarity with some very sort of dark entities things, or working with taboo shadow material. That's really in his chart. And also he had a kind of grounding system that allows him to pursue such intense type practices over decades. Okay. However, Aleister Crowley has something very interesting, is that the core activation for him around magic and initiation is connected to his sense of self and identity. And there is a kind of mechanism from his astrological chart that shows that he is sort of, in a way, compelled to make his personal experience universal and to present himself as a kind of messianic figure. You know, that's because his identity is so much connected. He can't see really the difference between what is subjective and what is actually universal. And he kind of sees himself as superior and special and having some kind of cosmic mythologic role. So that's his kind of weak point. Another weak point of it is, from his chart, not taking care of his biography, is the fact that he has always a kind of tension, because in order to be seen and recognized in his role of a kind of messianic, prophetic, or whatever figure, he has to connect to people and to create organizations and orders and structures around him. That's part of his mission also. At the same time, since his whole structure is built around breaking free from inherited moral and religious structures, that's very much in both, like the placement of his Lilith, and is that he will always clash at some point with the people he's working with. And you see this actually manifested in his life, is that he can have the greatest people around him. He has these super rich ladies who just finance him for everything. He's got these great friends, these super knowledgeable, and then he will sort of clash with them, destroy them, or break away from them. And that's also part of it, you know. So what I'm saying is that the practice is one thing, but then we each have a kind of structure, and there are things with which we can be sort of good, but never maybe become a genius, you know. Like, I will never be like a genius musician. I learned a bit of like saxophone. I could play a little bit of guitar. That's all, you know. My sister, she learned piano when she was 4.5, and she plays really well, but still she didn't make it into a job. My cousin is a piano teacher, and she's just amazing at it, you know. So it's a bit like that. So, but in magic, it's not only about magic itself, it's about the different branches of magic. So some people are just great at divination, like tarot reading. Some people are great at like astrology, which is more like brainy, mental. Some are great at like spell work. Some are great for like working with some very dark type entities. Some are great for healing work, you know. So they are like specialities also. People are more inclined and more have more abilities for something. Like even Alan Chapman and Duncan, you see both of them. Like Alan has more this kind of solar authority. So when they would work with spirits, evocation or something, Alan would be sort of giving orders, interrogating the spirits, because he has this kind of projective Leo aspect, you know. So he gains like divine authority and can certainly engage with spirits with authority. Then Duncan is more receptive. is extremely receptive. He can hear very clearly, see things in a very, and has this very subtle, and it shows when he interviewed this very sort of intimate, subtle, psychological sense. And therefore, if they both have to work alone, they can do both. But if they have to work together, of course, one will be more, they would separate the work, and one will do, same between like Kelly and John Dee or that type of thing. Yeah.
This has been incredible, Alex. Thank you very much. I do think we should do another one. Actually, I'd like to ask you quite a bit more about entities and the various types of entities you've engaged with and the way they're conceived of in different systems and worked with in different systems and so on. I think that would be a very interesting episode. You've also mentioned safety and this idea of safety, which, of course, naturally produces the idea of danger. One of the criticisms, I think, of chaos magic is in its ad hoc approach, in its experimental, just try it kind of approach, is that, perhaps, I wonder if you agree with this criticism, perhaps it might bring somebody into contact with forces and experiences and persons of various types that could be dangerous. That they meddle with evoking or invoking various entities or who knows what, and then that could have negative effects.
So what I've seen a lot with chaos magicians, first of all, from real life experience of people, is that in a way they are taught and believe that these are just psychological archetype, like symbolic entities, but that have no agency outside the practitioner's own mind. And at some point, they do contact and work with entities that prove them the contrary, prove them wrong. Or they get into by the fact also that they get into a situation where they can't get out of it. I mean, one of a fascinating person you interviewed dealt with a kind of entity like possessing and spirit attachment type of thing. This is really real and very difficult to get rid of so this type of thing can happen. But the main problem, I think, the main risk is less about that, I would say, but that's something also can be a problem with chaos magic, is that the main grounding thing is your everyday life. Means people need to have structure in their enough sleep, like ideally go to bed every day at the same hour, wake up at the same time every day. You need to have a very structured lifestyle, you need to have a job, a kind of stable relationship. That's all the grounding elements of your life. Also some kind of physical activity, sports. So as a safety, for me, it's less about teaching people to protect the way I described it with shields and stuff. It's more about protecting their sanity and ability to process nervous system overstimulation with very stable kind of hygiene of lifestyle. Okay, so what you eat, how much you sleep, have this kind of thing. The problem with young people I know and work with, first of all, is that if they don't have a job, like office type job, they would tend, like sometimes they contact me, like it's like, I can see their post was like at 3-4 o'clock in the morning. And obviously it's not like they wake up early, like they go to bed very late. So, and then some people are into complicated relationships and they don't have a fixed job. And chaos magic actually promotes that in a way, because from the first like principle I described that I like, it started to shift into a kind of really like chaotic type tradition in a way that promotes the kind of deconstruction of the self by being chaotic. And that's, I think, the most dangerous thing that can happen. People need to be super grounded because, and this also applies, like I did this Chumo practice at the very wrong time. I would have known that by what I know now, but I didn't know back then, is that when your work or relationship or something gives you a lot of stress already, if you do some kind of intense energy practice, you just fry your nervous system. Like it pushes you to some kind of burnout. So people need to be aware of that. And I've seen, like, for young people, that's often the problem. So again, just to finalize and make my point on this. However, before that, chaos magic, there's one thing good about chaos magic is actually this belief shifting. Because it's seen as a safety mechanism, because people who really believe a magical worldview, and you see this a lot nowadays with the kind of love and light, new agey type, is that when you get stuck into this, you actually lose ground with reality. So you need to be able to switch from a purely kind of religious, mystical worldview during your practice. But when you get back to work on the next day, you get back to some kind of super down-to-earth, materialistic, rational view of life. And if you have this ability, that's also very grounding. It's a way to switch and to completely cut, the access to the unconscious and the sort of psychic material in your being. So that's very useful. Yeah, that's more or less I think, all I can say about the topic. So the danger, I would say, is less about negative entities. It's more about managing nervous system overdrive. I mean, the real danger that I've seen is spiritual psychosis. I mean, if you see the broad range of what nowadays people call Kundalini syndrome, it's basically all the dangers of magic you can have. Like insomnia, nervous breakdown, burnout, psychotic events like hearing voices and things out of control that you can't close, energy related problems, all that stuff. It's basically what can go wrong. So the best cure for that is to proceed step by step based on a kind of very regulated and the other thing also, like when Duncan Barfoot was talking about the Abraham Melon, okay, I didn't have much trouble with it, I would say. So maybe it's because I was lucky, maybe because about my system, the way like astrology would describe it, is sort of self-regulating in a way. But maybe also it's because I had more than 15 years of Zen practice before that. This is why I would say, because, and that's why also maybe I started talking more about meditation and like Zen type practice, is because all the way until now, and we can finish on this, my main practice is, and I always been, Zen type meditation. Like even when you are fully into magic, you do this for a short moment, but then your core practice, at least in my case, is always this type of meditation that sort of grounds you physically, because the posture itself is physically grounding. It frees your mind from psychic, stuff, and makes your very clear and grounded, basically. So that's the hygiene also is part of it. And it triggers development in a kind of safe way, not chaotic way. Chaos magic without the chaos.
Yeah. What do you think about the role of devotion as a parachute cord in these kinds of workings?
Parachute as a safety, you would say?
Yeah.
One thing is that devotion opens the heart. And actually, communication with spirits, all these mediumnic abilities, the way I understand them energetically, are related more to the heart center, this part of the body, so energetically. And therefore, this also maybe explains why women in general are more skilled for that. They have often, I know a lot of them, just like 20 or something, they are sort of born, or they have this very strong sort of mediumnic psychic abilities, because they are more in touch with their emotions than at least a guy like me. They are more into this kind of an emotional, devotional, loving type of energy. So that helps for that. Is it really a safety mechanism? I don't know. Frankly, I don't know, because it's not. There's a risk of permeability, like receiving more. Like mystics. If you take like Saint Teresa of Avila, who's very heart devotionally inclined. That also for her generates a lot of emotional psychological material connected to a mystical visionary experiences. And therefore, such people are most likely to go through this kind of emotional ups and downs, while somebody like Meister Eckhart, who's this kind of Dominican super sort of rational, whose spiritual practice is in a way very similar to something like Zen Buddhism, didn't seem to show signs of that kind of thing. So I don't think it's really a kind of safety measure. But of course, having a kind of personal, very strong connection with a protective deity will bring the protection of this deity, So somebody who has a great devotion to like the Virgin Mary or to Archangel Michael or something will benefit from their, or Kali or Durga or something, will benefit from their protection. From a magical point of view. Maybe some people don't believe in it, but that's what I've noticed,
Fascinating stuff. Thank you, Alex. Is there anything you'd like to say by way of conclusion, or anything else you'd like to mention before we bring this to an end?
I think we've talked a lot, so I don't want to make it too long. But anyway, it's always nice to talk and share about these things. So no, I just want to thank you for your questions, your interest, and the opportunity that you give me to share this with like-minded people.
Alex W., thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.